David Chen had perfected the art of being invisible. For 8 years, he had stood guard at the palace gates, his crisp uniform pressed to perfection, his posture rigid with military precision. To everyone who passed by, he was just another face. Among the royal guards, unremarkable, dependable, and entirely forgettable. That was exactly how he wanted it. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., David would arrive at the palace 2 hours before his shift began. He would change into his uniform in the small locker room beneath the east wing, checking his appearance 3 times in the mirror before joining his fellow guards. His colleagues knew him as a quiet man who kept to himself, someone who never joined them for drinks after work or shared stories about his personal life. The other guards had stopped trying to befriend David years ago. They assumed he was simply antisocial, or perhaps dealing with personal problems that made him withdrawn. What they didn't know was that David's reluctance to socialize had nothing to do with unfriendliness and everything to do with protecting a secret that could destroy everything he had worked for. During his shifts, David would stand at his assigned post for hours, watching the crowds of tourists who gathered outside the palace gates. He would take photos, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty while he remained perfectly still like a statue. Children would sometimes wave at him, trying to make him smile or break character. But David had learned to maintain his composure no matter what happened around him. The palace was a world of strict protocols and ancient traditions. Every guard knew their place in the hierarchy, every movement was choreographed, and every day followed the same predictable routine. For most of his colleagues, this structure was comforting and secure. For David, it was a carefully constructed prison that allowed him to hide in plain sight. His supervisor, Captain Morrison, considered David one of his most reliable guards. Never late, never sick, never causing trouble or drawing unwanted attention. Morrison had tried to promote David several times over the years, offering him positions that would have meant better pay and more responsibility. But David always declined, claiming he was happy with his current duties. What Morrison and the other guards didn't understand was that David's position at the main gate was strategic. It allowed him to observe everyone who entered and left the palace, to memorize faces and patterns, to gather information that he filed away in his remarkable memory. They saw a dedicated guard doing his job. David knew he was conducting surveillance on some of the most powerful people in the country. After his shifts ended at 6 p.m., David would change back into civilian clothes and disappear into the crowded London streets. His colleagues assumed he went home to a simple flat somewhere in the city, perhaps to watch television or read a book. The reality was far more complicated and dangerous than any of them could have imagined. David's real day began when his guard duties ended. He would take a different route home each evening, checking for anyone who might be following him, ducking into shops, or using reflective surfaces to observe the people behind him. These weren't the paranoid habits of someone with mental health issues. They were the survival skills of someone living 2 completely different lives. His flat in South London was modest and unremarkable from the outside, exactly what you would expect from a palace guard's salary. But inside, hidden behind false walls and concealed compartments, was equipment that would have shocked his fellow guards and terrified his supervisors.
High-end computers,
Encrypted communication devices, multiple passports with different names, and files containing information about palace security that should never have left the building. The truth was that David Chen wasn't just a palace guard. He was one of the most successful intelligence operatives of his generation, working for an organization so secretive that most government officials didn't know it existed. His 8 years of loyal service to the crown were actually 8 years of the most sophisticated espionage operation ever conducted on British soil. David had been recruited 15 years earlier, while studying computer science at university. His professors had noticed his exceptional analytical abilities and his talent for languages. He spoke Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, and 3 other languages fluently. What they didn't know was that foreign intelligence services had also noticed these same talents. The recruitment had been subtle and gradual. A casual conversation with a visiting lecturer, an invitation to a special seminar, a scholarship opportunity that seemed too good to pass up. By the time David realized he was being courted by foreign agents, he was already deeply involved in activities that could have landed him in prison for the rest of his life. David was smarter than his handlers had anticipated. Instead of becoming their puppet, he had learned to play multiple sides against each other, selling information to the highest bidder while always keeping his most valuable secrets to himself. The palace guard position had been his idea, a perfect cover that would give him access to some of Britain's most closely guarded secrets, while appearing completely innocent to anyone who investigated his background. His handlers believed they had planted him in the perfect position to spy on the royal family and gather intelligence about British security procedures. What they didn't know was that David had his own agenda, one that went far beyond serving any single government or organization. He was building something much more valuable than a spy network. He was creating leverage that would eventually make him untouchable. Every day, David would observe the patterns of palace life, memorizing the faces of visitors, noting security weaknesses, and identifying opportunities for future operations. He had developed relationships with other staff members, not as friends, but as sources of information who had no idea they were being manipulated. The young woman who worked in the communications office would often chat with David during her smoke breaks, unknowingly revealing details about internal palace security measures. The maintenance supervisor frequently complained to David about budget cuts and staffing problems, providing valuable intelligence about vulnerabilities in the palace's physical security. David had spent years building these relationships carefully, never pushing too hard for information, never asking direct questions that might raise suspicions. He had learned that the best intelligence often came from people who simply needed someone to listen to their complaints and frustrations. As he walked home through the London streets on this particular evening, David had no idea that his carefully constructed double life was about to be exposed in the most spectacular and dangerous way possible. A single mistake made months earlier and long forgotten was about to surface and destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday morning in March. David was standing at his usual post near the main gate when he noticed a man in a gray suit watching him from across the street. The man wasn't trying to hide his surveillance, which immediately put David on high alert. In his experience, when watchers wanted to be seen, it usually meant something bad was about to happen. David maintained his rigid guard posture. While using his peripheral vision to study the stranger, the man was middle-aged, well-dressed, and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. More concerning was the small earpiece barely visible in his left ear, and the way his eyes never left David's position. This wasn't a tourist or casual observer. This was a professional. Throughout his 8-hour shift, the man remained across the street, sometimes pretending to read a newspaper or check his phone, but never leaving his post. David's training kicked in automatically, began running through possibilities in his mind, trying to identify which of his many activities might have attracted unwanted attention. Had one of his intelligence contacts been compromised? Had someone noticed unusual patterns in his behavior? Or worse, had one of the foreign agencies he worked with decided he knew too much and needed to be eliminated? David had always known that his double life carried enormous risks, but he had believed his careful planning and meticulous attention to detail would protect him. When his shift ended at 6 p.m., David followed his usual routine of changing clothes and preparing to leave. But instead of taking his normal route home, he decided to test whether he was being followed. He walked to the nearest underground station, bought a ticket, and then doubled back through the station's multiple exits, using the reflective surfaces in crowded passages to observe anyone who might be tracking him. The gray-suited man was still there, now accompanied by a woman in a dark coat. They were good at their job, maintaining distance, switching positions, using the crowd for cover. But David had spent years learning to spot surveillance, and their presence confirmed his worst fears. Someone had discovered his secret, and they were closing in. David managed to lose his followers in the maze of London's underground system. But he knew this was only a temporary victory. If they had found him once, they would find him again. He needed to understand who was hunting him and why. Before they made their move, that night David sat in his hidden control room, reviewing encrypted messages from his various contacts and handlers. Nothing seemed unusual in his recent communications. His latest intelligence reports had been routine, and none of his ongoing operations appeared to have been compromised. But something had clearly gone wrong, and David needed to find out what. The answer came 3 days later in the most unexpected way possible. David was reading the morning newspaper during his lunch break when a small article on page 7 caught his attention. The headline read, "Government Database Breach Exposes Thousands of Civil Servants." The article described how hackers had infiltrated a secure government database containing personal information about employees across various departments, including palace staff. David's blood ran cold as he read the details. The breach had occurred 2 months earlier, but the government had only recently discovered the extent of the damage. Thousands of personnel files had been copied, including detailed background checks, security clearances, and employment histories. Anyone with access to this information would be able to cross-reference David's official palace guard's file with other government databases. The implications were staggering. David's carefully constructed identity as a simple palace guard would crumble under serious scrutiny. His real education, his language skills, his travel history, and dozens of other details that didn't match his cover story were all contained in various government files. If someone connected the dots, they would realize that David Chen was much more than he appeared to be. But the newspaper article revealed something even more disturbing. The hackers hadn't just stolen the information, they had posted portions of it on the dark web, selling access to the highest bidders. This meant that David's real identity could be in the hands of anyone with enough money and motivation to buy it. David spent the next several hours discreetly using his phone to check various dark web marketplaces. What he found confirmed his worst fears. His personnel file, along with thousands of others, was being sold to the highest bidders. But more alarming was the identity of some of the buyers' foreign intelligence services, criminal organizations, and private security firms that specialized in blackmail and extortion. The watchers across from the palace weren't the only ones who knew his secret. David realized he was now exposed to multiple threats from different directions, each with their own agenda and methods. Some might want to recruit him, others might want to eliminate him, and still others might simply want to exploit his position for their own purposes. That evening, David made a decision that went against every instinct he had developed during his years as a spy. Instead of running or trying to disappear, he decided to take control of the situation. If his secret was going to be exposed, he would expose it on his own terms, and in a way, it gave him the best chance of survival. David began reaching out to his most trusted contacts in the intelligence community, not the foreign handlers who thought they controlled him, but the few individuals who understood the complex game he had been playing. These were people who existed in the gray areas between nations and organizations. Professionals who valued information and loyalty above political allegiances. His first call was to Maria Santos, former CIA operative who now worked as an independent intelligence broker. Maria had worked with David on several operations over the years, and she was one of the few people who understood the full scope of his activities. "David," Maria's voice was tense when she answered his encrypted call. "I was wondering when you would contact me. The word is out that someone very interesting is working at Buckingham Palace. A lot of people are asking questions. How bad is it?" David asked, though he already suspected the answer. "It's bad enough that I've had 3 different organizations approach me asking what I know about you. The good news is that nobody seems to have the complete picture yet. The bad news is that several very dangerous people are trying to put the pieces together." David felt a mixture of relief and terror. His secret was spreading through the intelligence community, but apparently no one had figured out the full extent of his activities. Still had time to act, but not much. "I need options, Maria. What are my chances of getting out of this cleanly?" There was a long pause before Maria responded. "Honestly? Not good. You've been playing too many sides for too long. Someone is going to want payback, and others are going to see you as a threat that needs to be eliminated. Your best bet might be to pick a side and hope they protect you." But David had no intention of placing his fate in someone else's hands. He had spent 8 years building leverage and gathering information for exactly this type of situation. If his enemies wanted to play hardball, he was prepared to show them just how dangerous a cornered spy could be. The surveillance team had grown bolder by Friday. David counted at least 6 different operatives, taking turns watching him throughout his shift. They were no longer trying to hide their presence, which meant they were either preparing to make a move or trying to intimidate him into making a mistake. David recognized the psychological pressure tactics from his own training. They wanted him nervous and off balance. But David had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Hidden throughout London were safe houses, emergency supplies, and escape routes that even his closest contacts didn't know about. More importantly, he had been gathering insurance policies for 8 years, compromising information about powerful people that could protect him if his cover was blown. During his lunch break, David made a series of seemingly innocent phone calls. To anyone listening, they sounded like a man making routine appointments, a dentist visit, car service, a dinner reservation. But each call was actually coded communication with different assets he had cultivated over the years. By the end of his lunch hour, David had activated a network of informants, allies, and debtors who owed him favors. The first response came from Tommy Richardson, a former SAS operative who now worked palace security from the inside. Tommy had no idea about David's intelligence activities, but David had helped him cover up a gambling debt 3 years earlier that would have cost him his job. When David asked Tommy to meet him after work for a quiet drink, Tommy agreed without question. "You seem nervous, mate," Tommy observed, as they sat in a crowded pub near Westminster. "Everything all right?" David had rehearsed this conversation carefully. "I think someone's been asking questions about me at work." "Have you heard anything unusual?" Tommy's expression grew serious. "It's funny you should mention that. A couple of blokes in suits were sniffing around the security office yesterday, asking about personnel files and clearance procedures. Captain Morrison told them to bugger off, but they had the kind of credentials that make people nervous." Confirmed David's suspicions that his enemies were working through official channels as well as conducting their own surveillance. Someone with significant government connections was investigating him, which meant his time was running shorter than he had hoped. "Did you catch their names or which department they were from?" One of them flashed MI5 credentials, but something felt off about it. Too clean, if you know what I mean. Like they were trying too hard to look official. David nodded, filing this information away. Fake government credentials suggested either foreign operatives trying to gain official access, or real government agents working off the books. Either possibility was dangerous, but in different ways. That evening, David received an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. The message came from Viktor Petrov, his primary Russian handler, whom David hadn't heard from in months. The message was brief and ominous. Package compromised. Retrieval imminent. Remain in position. The language was code, but the meaning was clear. The Russians knew about David's exposure and were planning to extract him, whether he wanted to. Go or not. In their world, a compromised asset was either rescued or eliminated to prevent further damage. David had no intention of spending the rest of his life in a Moscow safe house, assuming he even made it that far. But the Russian message revealed something important. Multiple intelligence agencies were now aware of his situation. This meant the leak was spreading faster than he had anticipated, and soon every major player would be trying to grab him or neutralize him. David spent the weekend implementing the escape plan he had hoped never to use. He visited several safe deposit boxes around London, retrieving false documents, emergency funds, and portable hard drives containing his most valuable intelligence. He also activated several dead drops, leaving messages for contacts who might be able to help him navigate the dangerous game he was now playing. On Sunday evening, David received a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably British. "Mr. Chen, my name is James Whitmore. I represent certain interests within Her Majesty's government who are very interested in having a conversation with you. I suggest we meet tomorrow morning before your shift begins." David's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm just a palace guard." Whitmore's chuckle was cold and humorless. "Mr. Chen, we both know that's not true. We also know that several foreign agencies are currently fighting over your services. We would prefer to resolve this situation quietly and professionally, but that requires your cooperation." The call ended before David could respond, but the message was clear. British intelligence had finally pieced together his real identity and activities. Now, he was caught between multiple agencies, each with their own agenda for dealing with him. David spent Sunday night reviewing his options, all of which seemed to lead to either imprisonment or death. He could try to run, but with so many agencies hunting him, he wouldn't get far. He could surrender to the British authorities and hope for mercy, but his years of selling their secrets made that unlikely. He could accept extraction by one of his foreign handlers, but that would mean abandoning any hope of a normal life. But there was a fourth option, one that was incredibly dangerous but might give him a chance to survive with his freedom intact. David could use the information he had gathered over 8 years to orchestrate a complex game that would pit his enemies against each other while creating space for him to escape. The plan would require perfect timing, credible luck, and a willingness to burn every bridge he had ever built in the intelligence community. But it was his only chance to avoid spending the rest of his life looking over his shoulder or sitting in a prison cell. On Monday morning, David arrived at the palace 2 hours early as usual, but this time he wasn't going to change into his uniform. Instead, he made his way to a maintenance area that he had scouted years earlier, a place with multiple exits and no security cameras. If James Whitmore wanted a meeting, David would give him one, but on his own terms. At exactly 7 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the maintenance entrance. 2 men in dark suits got out, looking around carefully before one of them spoke into a radio. David watched from his concealed position, noting their positions and counting possible escape routes. James Whitmore emerged from the sedan's back seat. He was older than David had expected, probably in his late 50s. With the bearing of someone who had spent decades in the intelligence community. More importantly, he was alone except for his security detail, which suggested he was confident about his position in this negotiation. David took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. It was time to discover whether 8 years of careful planning would save his life or simply make his death more interesting for the people trying to kill him. James Whitmore smiled as David emerged from the shadows, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. The 2 security agents immediately positioned themselves to block any escape routes, their hands resting casually near their concealed weapons. David noted their positions but showed no sign of concern as he walked calmly toward the senior intelligence officer. "Mr. Chen, thank you for accepting my invitation," Whitmore said, his tone conversational despite the tense circumstances. "Must say, your file makes for fascinating reading. 8 years of loyal service to the Crown, exemplary performance reviews, and absolutely no indication that you've been selling state secrets to half the intelligence agencies in the world." David maintained his composure, though internally he was analyzing every word for clues about how much Whitmore actually knew. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else. I'm just a palace guard who's about to be late for his shift." Whitmore pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive dossier. David Chen, age 32, born in Manchester to Chinese immigrants, studied computer science at Cambridge, graduated summa cum laude, speaks 7 languages fluently, including Mandarin, Russian, and Arabic, recruited by Palace Security 8. Years ago, after a supposedly random selection process, he paused, looking up at David with amusement. "Shall I continue? Because it gets much more interesting when we talk about your weekend trips to Prague, your encrypted communications with known foreign operatives, and the rather impressive sum of money you've accumulated in various offshore accounts." David realized that Whitmore's knowledge was more comprehensive than he had hoped. But there were still gaps he could exploit. Even if any of that were true, what exactly are you proposing? "Now we're having a real conversation," Whitmore said, closing the tablet. "Here's the situation, Mr. Chen. Several foreign agencies want you extracted or eliminated. My superiors want you prosecuted for treason. But I have a different idea, one that might benefit everyone involved." David waited silently, knowing that Whitmore's proposal would reveal crucial information about the government's real position and priorities. We know you've been playing multiple sides, selling information to whoever pays the most. What we don't know is the full extent of your network, or the complete list of operations you've been involved in. We also don't know about the insurance policies you've undoubtedly collected over the years. Whitmore began walking slowly around the maintenance area, his security detail maintaining their positions. I'm offering you a deal, Mr. Chen. Full cooperation with our debriefing process in exchange for immunity from prosecution and protection from your former associates. Help us understand what you've learned and who you've been working with, and we'll help you disappear safely. David had expected this type of offer, but Whitmore's delivery suggested there were additional layers to the proposal. And in return, you want me to burn everyone I've ever worked with? Not necessarily, Whitmore replied with a slight smile. We want you to help us understand the current intelligence landscape so we can make informed decisions about our own operations. Some of your contacts might prove useful to us. Others might need to be neutralized. It was a sophisticated offer that acknowledged David's value while giving the government maximum flexibility in how they used his information. But David had no intention of spending the rest of his life as a debriefed asset, constantly looking over his shoulder and dependent on government protection. I need time to consider your offer, David said carefully. I'm afraid time is something we don't have much of, Whitmore replied. Our intelligence suggests that the Russians are planning to extract you within the next 48 hours. Chinese are also showing unusual interest in your activities. If you want our protection, you need to accept it now. David felt the walls closing in around him, but he had one more card to play. Before I make any decisions, I need to know something. How did you really find out about my activities? The database breach explains some of it, but not your level of detail about my operations. Whitmore's expression changed subtly, revealing a hint of satisfaction that suggested David had asked exactly the right question. That's where things get interesting, Mr. Chen. You see, we've known about your double life for almost 2 years. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. If British intelligence had known about his activities for 2 years, it meant everything he thought he understood about his situation was wrong. We've been watching you, learning about your network, and occasionally feeding you information that we wanted your handlers to receive, Whitmore continued. You've been working for us without knowing it, helping us understand and manipulate your foreign contacts. David's mind raced as he tried to process the implications. How many of his intelligence coups had actually been orchestrated by British intelligence? How many of his foreign contacts had been compromised because of information he had unwittingly provided? The database breach wasn't an accident either, Whitmore added. We arranged for your file to be leaked to specific buyers, knowing it would force various agencies to show their hand. We wanted to see who was interested in you and how they would try to approach you. David realized he had been playing a game where the rules were constantly changing, and he had never understood who his real opponents were. But this revelation also gave him an opportunity. If Whitmore was being truthful about the level of British intelligence involvement, it meant they valued his position and wanted to maintain it. So what happens now? David asked. Do I continue being your unwitting double agent, or do we formalize the arrangement? That depends on how reasonable you're willing to be, Whitmore replied. We could continue the current arrangement with you believing you're working for foreign agencies while actually serving British interests, or we could bring you inside and give you official status as one of our operatives. It was a clever offer that gave David the illusion of choice, while actually limiting his options. But David had spent 8 years learning to navigate complex intelligence operations, and he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. There's a third option, David said quietly. One that might serve everyone's interests better than either of your proposals. Whitmore raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued despite himself. I'm listening. What if I told you that I've been gathering information not just about foreign intelligence operations, but about corruption and illegal activities among British officials? What if I had evidence that could expose security breaches, financial crimes, and treasonous activities by people in positions of trust? The change in Whitmore's expression was subtle but unmistakable. David had struck a nerve, suggesting that his value went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. That would be... very interesting, Whitmore said carefully. What kind of evidence are we talking about? David smiled for the first time since the conversation began. He was about to reveal the true scope of his 8-year operation and the information he had been gathering that went far beyond simple espionage. The game was about to change dramatically, and this time David intended to be the one controlling the rules. David's revelation about evidence of British corruption had clearly caught Whitmore off guard. The senior intelligence officer's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a man who was suddenly dealing with variables he hadn't anticipated. David pressed his advantage, knowing that this might be his only chance to shift the balance of power in his favor. Over the past 8 years, I've had access to more than just palace security information, David continued, his voice steady and confident. I've observed meetings, overheard conversations, and documented activities involving government officials, military leaders, and members of parliament. Some of what I've learned would be extremely embarrassing if it became public. Other information would result in criminal prosecutions. Whitmore's security details shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in their superior's demeanor. The older man studied David with new respect and a hint of wariness. You're talking about blackmail, Mr. Chen. That's a dangerous game, even. For someone with your skills, I'm talking about survival, David replied. You want me to cooperate with your debriefing and burn my foreign contacts? They want me extracted or eliminated? I want to live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. The information I've gathered gives me leverage to negotiate terms that work for everyone. David pulled out his phone and showed Whitmore a series of encrypted files. These contained detailed records of 3 separate incidents were classified. Information was sold to private contractors by senior government officials. I have photographs, audio recordings, and financial documentation that would stand up in court. The blood drained from Whitmore's face as he recognized the implications. David wasn't just a rogue agent selling secrets to foreign powers. He was sitting on evidence that could bring down significant portions of the British government and intelligence community. What exactly are you proposing? Whitmore asked, his earlier confidence replaced by careful calculation. A partnership, David said. I'll continue working at the palace, but now as an official asset with your full knowledge and support. I'll feed controlled information to my foreign contacts, helping you understand and manipulate their operations. In return, you provide me with protection, resources, and most importantly, official backing for my activities. David paused, letting his words sink in before delivering his final condition. And the information I've gathered about British corruption stays secure, as long as our partnership remains mutually beneficial. Whitmore was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing his options. David could see the older man's mind working through the implications of each possible course of action. Rejecting David's proposal would mean losing a valuable asset and potentially facing exposure of damaging information. Accepting it would mean acknowledging that a palace guard had outsmarted the entire British intelligence establishment. You realize that what you're describing is essentially a form of institutionalized blackmail, Whitmore finally said. My superiors won't appreciate being held hostage by their own operative. Then don't tell them, David replied with a slight smile. As far as they need to know, you successfully recruited a valuable double agent who's willing to work exclusively for British interests. The details of our arrangement can remain between us. It was a bold gambit that relied on Whitmore's own self-interest and career ambitions. If the arrangement worked, Whitmore would get credit for turning a dangerous situation into a significant intelligence victory. If it failed, both men would likely face severe consequences. Whitmore's phone buzzed with an urgent message. After reading it, his expression grew even more serious. We have a problem, Mr. Chen. Our surveillance indicates that Russian operatives are moving into position around the palace. They're planning to extract you during your shift change this evening. David felt his stomach drop. He had expected the Russians to make a move eventually, but he had hoped for more time to solidify his arrangement with Whitmore. How many operatives are we talking about? At least 6 that we've identified. Probably more, using a combination of diplomatic cover and false identities. If they succeed in taking you, it will create an international incident and expose everything we've discussed here. The situation was spiraling beyond David's control, but it also created an opportunity to prove his value to Whitmore. "I can help you stop them," David said. "I know how they operate, what their extraction protocols look like, and how they'll try to get me out of the country." Whitmore studied David carefully, clearly weighing whether he could trust a man who had been deceiving everyone for 8 years. "What did you have in mind?" "Let me go to work as usual, but with your people providing invisible backup. When the Russians make their move, we'll be ready for them. You'll get to roll up their operation and capture valuable intelligence about their activities in London. I'll demonstrate my loyalty to our new partnership." It was a dangerous plan that relied on precise timing and coordination between agencies that had been adversaries just hours earlier. But it was also the kind of bold operation that could establish trust and prove David's commitment to his new role. Whitmore made a decision that would have seemed impossible when the conversation began. "All right, Mr. Chen, we'll try your plan. But understand that if this goes wrong, if you're playing some deeper game that I don't understand, the consequences will be severe for both of us." David nodded, understanding the weight of what they were attempting. "I'll need encrypted communication with your tactical team and updated intelligence on Russian positions. And I'll need assurance that if something goes wrong, you'll still honor our agreement about the information I've collected." "You'll have everything you need," Whitmore agreed. "But David and I think we're past the point of formal titles. You need to understand that this changes everything. You're no longer a freelance operative playing all sides. You're working for British intelligence, with all the protection and restrictions that entails." As they shook hands, David realized that his 8-year game was finally coming to an end. The simple palace guard who had fooled everyone was about to become an official agent of the crown, using his unique position and skills to serve British interests while navigating the dangerous world of international espionage. But first, he had to survive the next 12 hours. The Russians were coming, and they wouldn't be as reasonable as Whitmore had been about negotiating terms. David's new partnership with British intelligence was about to face its first and potentially most dangerous test, as Whitmore and his security detail prepared to leave. The senior intelligence officer turned back to David one final time. "By the way, your real name isn't David Chen, is it?" David smiled mysteriously. "That, Mr. Whitmore, is a conversation for another day. Right now, let's focus on making sure there is another day." The game was about to begin in earnest, and David finally knew which side he was playing for. The afternoon shift felt different, as David stood at his familiar post by the palace gates. To any observer, he appeared to be the same unremarkable guard who had stood there for 8 years. But now he wore a nearly invisible earpiece that connected him to a British intelligence tactical team, and his every movement was being monitored by operatives positioned throughout the area. "Falcon 1, this is Control," came Whitmore's voice through the earpiece. "We have visual confirmation of, at least for Russian operatives in position. They're using standard diplomatic cover to posing as tourists with cameras, one sitting in a black BMW parked across the street, and another browsing in the gift shop near the east entrance." David acknowledged the transmission with a subtle nod, his training allowing him to receive complex information while maintaining his stoic guard posture. He had spent years perfecting the ability to appear completely unaware while actually cataloging every detail of his surroundings. As the afternoon wore on, David began to notice subtle changes in the patterns around him. The tourist seemed more focused on his position than on the palace itself. The black BMW had been parked in the same spot for over 3 hours, which was unusual given the parking restrictions in the area. Most tellingly, he recognized one of the tourists as someone he had seen during his meetings with Viktor Petrov months earlier. At 5:30 p.m., 30 minutes before his shift was scheduled to end, David received an encrypted text message on his personal phone. The message appeared to be from a wrong number, but David recognized it as a coded communication from his Russian handlers. "Package ready for pickup at usual location. Car waiting." The Russians were implementing their extraction plan exactly as David had predicted. They expected him to leave through the staff exit at the end of his shift, where a car would be waiting to take him to a safe house before moving him out of the country. What they didn't know was that British intelligence operatives were now positioned at every possible escape route. Control, "This is Falcon 1," David whispered into his concealed microphone. "The package is moving to delivery phase. Recommend. All units move to final positions." "Copy that, Falcon 1. All units are green light for operation. Remember, we need at least 2 of them alive for interrogation." As 6 p.m. approached, David began his usual and dove shift routine, but with subtle modifications that would signal his new British allies. Instead of exiting through the main staff door, he would use a maintenance corridor that Whitmore's team had rigged with surveillance equipment. This would allow them to document the Russian extraction attempt while ensuring David's safety. David changed out of his uniform for what he knew would be the last time. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, he would return as an official British intelligence operative with a completely different mission and identity. The simple palace guard who had fooled everyone for 8 years was about to disappear forever. As he walked toward the maintenance exit, David's earpiece crackled with urgent updates from the surveillance team. "Falcon 1, we have movement on all positions. Black BMW is starting its engine. Tourist team is moving toward your exit point. And we've identified 2 additional operatives positioned along your usual route home." David's heart rate increased, but his training kept him calm and focused. He had faced dangerous situations before, but never with so much at stake. Success would mean the beginning of a new life and career. Failure could mean death or worse. Spending the rest of his life as a prisoner of one intelligence agency or another, the maintenance corridor was dimly lit and lined with pipes and electrical conduits. David had chosen this route because it offered multiple hiding spots and escape routes, but it also made him feel vulnerable in a way that his open guard posts never had. He could hear footsteps echoing behind him, confirming that the Russian operatives were following according to plan. "Falcon 1, you have 3 tangos approaching your position," came Whitmore's voice. "British units are in position but holding back to avoid compromising the operation. You need to let them get close enough to confirm hostile intent." Understood the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. If British operatives moved too early, the Russians could claim they were simply lost tourists or diplomats. But if they waited too long, David could be captured or killed before help could reach him. The footsteps behind him grew closer. David could hear whispered conversations in Russian. His years of language training allowed him to understand that they were discussing the best way to subdue him without attracting attention. They had clearly been ordered to take him alive, which gave David a slight advantage in the upcoming confrontation. As David reached the exit door, a voice called out behind him in accented English. "Mr. Chen, please stop. We need to speak with you." David turned to see 3 men approaching, their hands visible but positioned to reach concealed weapons quickly. He recognized the lead operative as someone from Viktor Petrov's team, a professional who had been involved in several high-profile extractions over the years. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," David replied, maintaining his cover identity, even though everyone involved knew it was fiction. "Please don't make this difficult," the Russian operative said, stepping closer. "We have a car waiting outside. You're going to come with us voluntarily, or we'll have to use other methods to ensure your cooperation." It was the moment Whitmore's team had been waiting for, clear evidence of an attempted kidnapping of a British citizen on UK soil. David's earpiece immediately filled with coordinated tactical chatter as British operatives moved into position. But before the backup could arrive, one of the Russian operatives made a crucial mistake. Seeing David's apparent hesitation, he reached into his jacket for what was presumably a weapon or tranquilizer. David's 8 years of maintaining his cover had given him exceptional situational awareness and lightning-fast reflexes in one fluid motion. David grabbed a wrench from a nearby maintenance cart and struck the approaching operative in the wrist, causing him to drop his weapon. At the same time, he activated a hidden alarm system that Whitmore's team had installed in the corridor, flooding the area with bright lights and a piercing siren. The remaining Russian operatives, suddenly blinded and deafened, struggled to maintain their positions as British tactical teams burst through multiple entrances to the corridor. The carefully planned extraction had become a chaotic firefight in the space of seconds. "Everyone on the ground." "British intelligence," shouted the tactical team leader as his operatives surrounded the confused Russians. Within minutes it was over. 2 Russian operatives were in custody, One was being treated for injuries, and the fourth had somehow escaped in the confusion.
Ow.
David stood in the middle of the corridor, still holding the wrench, as Whitmore approached with a satisfied expression. Well, executed, David, Whitmore said, using his first name for the first time. You've just helped us roll up a major Russian intelligence operation and provided evidence of attempted kidnapping on British soil. This will have diplomatic repercussions for months. As the dust settled and the prisoners were led away, David realized that his double life was truly over. The leaked secret that had exposed his activities had ultimately led to the most significant victory of his career, but in service of his own country rather than foreign masters. So what happens now? David asked as they walked back toward the main palace complex. You get a proper briefing, a new identity, and a significant promotion, Whitmore replied. The simple palace guard is dead. Tomorrow you begin training as one of our most valuable operatives, with a mission that will make your previous activities look like amateur hour. David looked back at the palace gates where he had stood guard for 8 years, knowing he would never see them the same way again. His secret life as a double agent was over, but his career in intelligence was just beginning. The man who had fooled the world was finally ready to serve his country openly. Armed with 8 years of experience and the hard-won trust of the intelligence community he had once deceived, as they walked into the sunset, Whitmore handed David a secure phone and a new identification card. Welcome to the real game, Agent Thompson. Your country needs you. David Chen, the palace guard who had lived in the shadows, was gone forever. In his place stood a new operative ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Secure in the knowledge that he was finally fighting for the right side.